person have control and they're jealous of something, then they're going to try their best to get the other partner to get that guy out of the group.
He just didn't want to, he didn't want to be in partnership with me anymore because, we couldn't agree to agree. We couldn't, it just wasn't going the way it's supposed to go. So he just went on, and now he's formed a new group.
They knocked the Macarena off the top of the charts in 1996. 4 weeks at #1 with a song so smooth it made the whole world pay attention to black men harmonizing over a Bill Withers sample and a Teddy Riley beat. Blackstreet wasn't just a group. They were the sound of R&B growing up, the bridge between New Jack Swing and everything that came after, the proof that you could be street and soulful at the same time. Another level went quadruple platinum. They won a Grammy. They had the hits, the harmonies, the look, the legacy. But behind all that shine was a machine built on shifting lineups, bruised egos, and a founder who controlled everything. The sound, the vision, the name on the contracts. By the time the world stopped paying attention, the real battle wasn't on the charts anymore. It was in courtrooms, over who owned the trademark, who got to tour as Blackstreet, who deserved the money and the credit for a brand that never really belonged to everyone who sang it. What looked like brotherhood to the fans was, on paper, a business. And when the music stopped, that's when the real fight began. This is the story of Blackstreet, the group that gave us one of the smoothest anthems of the 90s, then spent the next 2 decades suing each other over who got to keep the name. But to understand how Four Voices became a trademark dispute, you have to go back to where it started, with one man's vision and the wreckage of his last group. Teddy Riley didn't need to prove anything by 1991. He'd already helped birth an entire sound, New Jack Swing, the fusion of hip-hop's drums with R&B's melodies that had turned Guy into superstars and made him the go-to producer for everyone from Michael Jackson to Bobby Brown. He was the architect, the studio wizard who could take a blank track and build a hit out of drum machines, samples, and vocal runs so tight they sounded like one voice split into 4. But Guy had imploded under the weight of egos and exhaustion, and Teddy wasn't the type to sit still. So he started building again, this time with a singer named Chauncey Black Hannibal, right there in New York where the sound was born. They called it Blackstreet, and from day one it was clear this wasn't going to be a democracy. It was Teddy's laboratory, and everyone else was there to help him cook. The early lineup came together fast. Chauncey on lead, Dave Hollister bringing that church-trained power, Levi Little rounding out the harmonies. They hit the studio, laid down tracks, and by 1993 they were already appearing on soundtracks, testing the waters. When the self-titled debut album Blackstreet dropped on Interscope in June 1994, it did what it needed to do. Singles like Booty Call and Before I Let You Go climbed the R&B charts. The harmonies were smooth, the production was unmistakably Teddy, and radio started paying attention. It wasn't Jodeci numbers, wasn't knocking anybody off the top of the Hot 100, but it was enough to show that Teddy Riley still knew how to build a group from scratch. Inside those studio sessions, something was already clear to anyone paying attention. Hollister would later describe Blackstreet as a machine built around Teddy's vision, not a brotherhood where everyone had equal say. Levi felt it too, the sense that they were pieces in a larger plan, replaceable if the equation didn't add up. And Teddy? He didn't hide it. He was the producer, the architect, the name on the checks. The group was his instrument, and if a key wasn't hitting the right note, he'd swap it out. That's not cruelty. That's how you survive in a business that chews up even the tightest crews. But it meant that while fans saw 4 men in matching outfits harmonizing, the reality was more like a corporation with a very clear CEO. And in this business, swapping out parts meant swapping out people. Between 1994 and 1995, while the debut album was still getting spins on Quiet Storm radio, Teddy made his move. Dave Hollister was out. Levi Little was out. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't a public blow-up splashed across the tabloids. It was clean, professional, the kind of thing that happens when a producer has a vision and the current pieces don't fit anymore. Hollister would say later that he left because he wanted autonomy, wanted to follow a spiritual calling that didn't involve being part of someone else's machine. He had the voice, the range, the church training. He could build his own thing, and eventually he did, carving out a lane in R&B and gospel where he answered to nobody but himself. Levi felt it too, that sense that Blackstreet was never really theirs to begin with, just a gig with great harmonies and a boss who owned the name on the contract. In their place came Eric Williams and Mark Middleton, two new voices, polished and ready, stepping into a rehearsal room where the songs were already written, the parts already mapped out, the expectations already sky high. Imagine learning Before I Let You Go and Booty Call from the guys who just sang them on tour, realizing you're not joining a band, you're joining a brand. You're the new engine in a car somebody else is driving, and if the ride works, you'll get paid and see the world. If it doesn't, you'll be the footnote in somebody's comeback story. Williams and Middleton knew the deal, or at least they thought they did. What they didn't know yet was that Teddy was about to bet the whole house on an album so different from the first one that it could either elevate them all or leave them scrambling for solo deals. Teddy was already thinking past Blackstreet half the time, still producing for other artists, still fielding calls from major names who wanted that Riley sound. Michael Jackson, Bobby Brown, Heavy D. His attention was split, his energy divided between the group and the solo work that kept his legend alive. That's the thing about being the architect. You never build just one thing. But it also meant that while he was chasing perfection in multiple studios, the new Blackstreet lineup had to gel fast, had to find chemistry on the fly, had to trust that the man who'd swap them in wouldn't swap them out just as quick if the numbers didn't hit. By the summer of 1996, the new Blackstreet had an album ready, a single that some of them weren't even sure about, and a producer who believed he'd just built the smoothest weapon R&B had ever heard. He was right. The album dropped in September 1996, and with it came a single built on a Bill Withers sample, a beat so crisp it sounded like it was tapping you on the shoulder, and a hook that refused to leave your head. No Diggity wasn't just smooth, it was surgical, the kind of song that worked on pop radio and the block at the same time, that had women nodding in the club and men reciting it in the car. Dr. Dre jumped on it, Queen Pen added her verse, and suddenly Blackstreet wasn't just another R&B group trying to keep up with Jodeci. They were the sound of right now, the bridge between the streets and the charts, the proof that New Jack Swing could grow up without losing its edge. The video shoot was a whole vibe, rain machines soaking the pavement, neon lights reflecting off puddles, oversized puppets lip-syncing alongside the group like some fever dream out of a Tim Burton film. Teddy stood off to the side watching the monitors, arms crossed, already knowing this was the one. Eric, Mark, and Chauncey hit their marks, suited up and smooth, not yet realizing that this moment, this video, this hook, this beat, was about to lock them into something they'd never fully escape. Because when you make a song this big, it stops being yours. It becomes the only thing people want to hear from you for the rest of your life. And big it was. No Diggity climbed the charts fast, knocked the Macarena off the top of the Billboard Hot 100 after a 14-week run, and then sat at number 1 for 4 straight weeks. By the end of 1996, the single had sold roughly 1.6 million copies, went platinum, and turned another level. The album the new lineup had bet everything on, into a monster. The album peaked at number 3 on the Billboard 200, hit number 1 on the R&B charts, and eventually went 4 times platinum in the United States. Radio couldn't get enough. MTV and BET put the video on repeat. Suddenly, Blackstreet wasn't just relevant, they were unavoidable. The recognition followed fast. By February 1997, they were standing on a stage at the Grammys holding the award for Best R&B Performance by a duo or group with vocals, the kind of hardware that separates the one-hit wonders from the legends. Teddy had done it again, rebuilt a group from the ground up, swapped in new voices, and delivered not just a hit, but a cultural moment. For Eric Williams and Mark Middleton, it must have felt surreal. 2 years ago, they weren't even in the group, and now they were Grammy winners, flying first class, performing on stages they used to watch on TV. But already, something was shifting. The same song that made them stars was starting to feel like a cage. Every interview ended with questions about No Diggity. Every show ended with the crowd chanting for it before they even walked on stage. The album had other songs, Don't Leave Me, Fix, and they were hits too, but nothing touched what No Diggity had become. And in a business where you're only as good as your last chart position, that kind of success doesn't just elevate you. It traps you in a moment you can never quite recreate. The cracks started showing on the road. By 1997, Blackstreet was everywhere. Arena tours, festival slots, radio shows, promotional appearances that blurred into one endless cycle of flights and hotel rooms and sound checks where they ran through the same set list every night. No Diggity always closed the show, always got the loudest response, always left the crowd singing the hook as they filed out into parking lots. And every single time, the group had to deliver it like it was the first time. Like they weren't exhausted. Like the song hadn't become both their greatest gift and their heaviest burden. Backstage, in those cramped dressing rooms that smelled like hair product and takeout, you could feel it. Voices getting hoarse, bodies wearing down, the quiet frustration of men who'd become famous for one moment they'd have to recreate forever. The follow-up singles helped keep the momentum going. Don't Leave Me climbed the R&B charts, all emotion and harmonies that reminded people Blackstreet could do more than just the hip-hop-leaning sound of No Diggity. Fix followed, keeping them on urban radio through 1997 and into 1998, proving Another Level wasn't a one-song album. But no matter how hard they pushed the other tracks, every interview, every appearance, every magazine feature came back to the same question. So tell us about No Diggity. The label loved it. Interscope had a money machine, and they were going to milk it for every platinum plaque they could get. But for the guys singing it night after night, the song was starting to feel less like a hit and more like a sentence. And then there was the other truth, the one that didn't make it into the press kits or the Grammy speeches. Blackstreet wasn't really a group in the way fans imagined. On paper, it was Blackstreet Entertainment Inc., a company owned by Teddy Riley and Chauncey Hannibal since 1992, with the trademark registered under their names. Eric and Mark, they were singers, great ones, essential ones, but singers, hired voices in a machine that Teddy built and controlled. Dave Hollister had felt it before he left, that sense that you could pour your soul into every note and still walk away with nothing if the contracts weren't in your favor. Now, Eric and Mark were starting to understand it too, realizing that all the screaming fans and sold-out shows didn't change the fact that their names weren't on the paperwork that mattered. It showed up in small moments, like when they did a radio interview and the host brought up Guy, Teddy's other group, the one that came before, the one that some people still considered his real legacy. You could see it on their faces, the tension, the forced smiles, the way Teddy's jaw tightened just a little. Because how do you share a stage with someone when you know they're always thinking about the other stage, the other group, the other version of this same dream? And how do you build trust in a brotherhood when the business behind it is structured like a corporation, with bosses and employees instead of partners? The answer came in 1999, and it sounded like desperation wrapped in expensive production. Finally, the third album arrived at a moment when R&B was shifting under everyone's feet. The late 90s had brought a wave of new acts with different energy. Neo-soul artists like D'Angelo and Erykah Badu were rewriting the rules with rawness and live instrumentation, while younger groups and solo stars were leaning harder into hip-hop collaborations that made even No Diggity feel like it came from a different era. Radio programmers who'd championed another level were now chasing the next sound, the next generation, and Blackstreet was starting to feel like the last generation. Still talented, still polished, but no longer the cutting edge. In the studio, the pressure was suffocating. Teddy was still the architect, still commanding the boards, still layering harmonies and drums with the precision that had made him a legend. But you could hear it in the sessions, the unspoken question hanging in the air between takes. Can we do it again? The label wanted another No Diggity, another crossover smash that would justify the marketing budget and the tour schedule. The group wanted to prove they were more than one song, and everyone knew, even if nobody said it out loud, that the magic from 1996 wasn't something you could just manufacture on command. Finally dropped, and the response was polite but lukewarm. It charted, it had singles, it sounded like Blackstreet, but it didn't move the culture the way Another Level had. The numbers told the story. No platinum plaques this time, no Grammy nominations, no moment where the world stopped to pay attention. It was the sound of a group trying to chase their own shadow while the ground shifted beneath them. By the early 2000s, the machine had stopped running. Members drifted into solo projects, side gigs, anything that didn't require them to pretend the chemistry was still there. The hiatus wasn't announced with a press release or a farewell tour. It just happened, the way things do when everyone's too tired to keep pretending. And then, in 2003, someone had the idea to try one more time. Level 2, framed as a spiritual sequel to Another Level, a return to the sound that had made them. But you can't go back to a moment that only existed because of timing and tension and a specific alignment of talent and hunger that can't be recreated by force of will alone. Level 2 came and went quietly, another album that reminded people of what Blackstreet used to be without giving them a reason to care about what Blackstreet was now. And in interviews that would come later, years later, when former members finally felt free to speak, the truth spilled out in pieces. Eric Williams talking about feeling like hired help in a group fans thought was a brotherhood. Dave Hollister describing the whole thing as a machine built around one man's vision. Levi Little remembering the moment he realized his voice mattered less than his willingness to follow orders. By 2003, Blackstreet existed more on paper than in practice. The name still had value, enough that people would spend the next decade fighting in court over who got to use it. And when a name has value but the people behind it can't agree on who earned it, the courts become the only stage left. By 2014, something unexpected happened. The classic lineup, Chauncey Black, Levi Little, Mark Middleton, and Eric Williams, found their way back to each other. Not in a studio, but on the road, playing festivals and nostalgic R&B package tours, where crowds still lit up at the opening notes of No Diggity. It felt for a moment like maybe the past could be repaired, like maybe the music was bigger than the business. They rehearsed the old songs, worked through the harmonies that still clicked after all the years and all the distance. And for fans who'd grown up on Another Level, seeing those faces together again was enough to buy a ticket and relive 1996 one more time. But behind the reunion, the tension was already building. Because while four men were singing under the Blackstreet name, the paperwork told a different story. Teddy Riley and Chauncey Hannibal owned Blackstreet Entertainment, Inc., the company that held the trademark since 1992, and as far as they were concerned, everyone else had always been employees. Talented, essential, but employees. And when those employees started touring internationally, using the Blackstreet name, the old photos, the full catalog, promoting themselves as the real deal, the lawyers got involved. In April 2015, Teddy Riley filed for a restraining order against Chauncey Hannibal, his co-founder, his original partner in building the group. The accusations were heavy: fraud, interference, trademark manipulation. Riley claimed that Chauncey had let the original Blackstreet trademark lapse and then re-registered it under his own control, effectively locking Teddy out of bookings and tours by telling venues that Riley had no right to perform as Blackstreet. The court documents painted a picture of two men who'd once shared a vision, now fighting over who got to sell it, with Teddy alleging he'd lost significant income because promoters didn't know who to believe. Then, in January 2018, the conflict widened. Riley and Hannibal, temporarily unified against a common target, filed a federal lawsuit against Mark Middleton and Eric Williams for trademark and copyright infringement. The complaint was detailed, clinical, laying out exactly how the former members had allegedly used the Blackstreet name, old group photos, and the entire catalog to promote a European tour without authorization. The legal language was clear. Middleton and Williams were accused of misleading fans into thinking they were seeing the original Blackstreet, when, according to the lawsuit, they had no legal right to use that name at all. Screenshots of tour flyers, promotional materials, social media posts, all circled and highlighted, all entered as evidence that two men who'd sung on the biggest hits were now being treated as trademark violators. Imagine sitting in a lawyer's office, looking at pictures of yourself on stage, and being told you're not allowed to claim the work you actually did, that the name you sang under, the songs you recorded, the crowds you moved, none of it gave you ownership of the thing fans associate with your face and your voice. And while all this played out in filings and courtrooms and legal threats, competing versions of Blackstreet kept showing up on tour schedules. Chauncey's lineup here, another configuration there, everyone trying to capture whatever money was left in the nostalgia circuit. Everyone claiming authenticity, nobody able to agree. But here's the strange thing about legacy. It doesn't need unity to survive. While the lawsuits dragged on and the former members avoided each other's names in interviews, Blackstreet kept performing, just not as one Blackstreet. Various configurations hit the road, playing the international festival circuit where 90s R&B still packs venues and sells tickets. Australia became a second home, with tours in 2015, 2016, 2018, and again in 2023, when they were announced as headliners alongside Montel Jordan for a nostalgia package that promised all the hits, all the memories, none of the drama. Promoters learned to navigate the trademark mess by booking whichever lineup could legally claim the name that week. And audiences, most of them just happy to hear the songs live, didn't ask too many questions about which version was real. Picture an outdoor festival in Australia, 2016, daylight fading into that purple hour where the lights start to matter. Whichever Blackstreet is on stage that night, the moment the opening chords of No Diggity drop, the crowd takes over. Thousands of voices singing the hook louder than the PA system. Hands in the air, people who were teenagers when the song came out now singing it to their own kids. On stage, the men in the matching outfits smile and hit their marks. Professionals doing what they've done for decades. And maybe in that moment, it doesn't matter who owns the trademark or who's still speaking to who, because the song is bigger than all of them now. A piece of collective memory that lives independent of the people who made it. But off stage, the story kept evolving in a different direction. By the 2020s, former members started sitting down for interviews. Long, unfiltered conversations on YouTube channels and podcasts where they finally said what they'd been holding for years. Eric Williams talked about feeling like hired help in a group the world thought was a family. Levi Little walked through the early days, and the moment he realized his voice mattered less than his compliance. Dave Hollister, long gone and successful in his own right, reflected on why leaving was the healthiest thing he ever did. These weren't bitter rants. They were grown men processing what it cost to be part of something beautiful and broken at the same time. And the internet listened. Dozens of "What happened to Blackstreet?" Videos racked up hundreds of thousands of views, each one trying to untangle the same question. How does a group this talented, this successful, end up so fractured? The comment sections filled with fans debating who was right, who was wronged, who deserves to tour under the name. Meanwhile, No Diggity kept racking up streams, showing up in commercials, getting sampled by younger producers, going viral on TikTok when a new generation discovered it and couldn't believe a song that Smooth came out before they were born. So what do you do with a legacy that can't agree on who built it? You stream it. You sample it. You play it at cookouts and weddings and late-night drives when you need something smooth to remind you of a time when R&B felt untouchable. Another level is still certified 4 times platinum, still sitting in collections and playlists next to the giants of the era. No Diggity never really left. It just became one of those songs that transcends the people who made it. A cultural artifact that younger producers study when they're trying to figure out how to blend hip-hop drums with gospel-trained harmonies, how to make a rap feature feel organic instead of tacked on, how to build a hook that sounds effortless but lands like a thesis statement. And that influence? It's everywhere. The blueprint Blackstreet laid down, the way they fused street credibility with vocal precision, the way they made collaboration between singers and rappers feel natural instead of gimmicky, became standard operating procedure for the next 2 decades of R&B. You hear it in the DNA of every group that came after, every producer who learned that you could be polished and raw at the same time, every artist who realized that the line between R&B and hip-hop was less a border and more a bridge. But here's the cost nobody talks about in the retrospectives and the anniversary posts. Blackstreet proved you can make something iconic and still lose control of it. You can sing on a song that goes quadruple platinum, that wins a Grammy, that gets streamed millions of times across generations, and still end up in court arguing about whether you're allowed to perform it under the name people associate with your voice. The business lesson is brutal and clear. Talent and success don't guarantee ownership, and if the contracts aren't in your favor from the beginning, no amount of hit records will fix that. Where are they now? Chauncey Hannibal still tours under the Blackstreet name, keeping the legacy alive for audiences who just want to hear the songs. Teddy Riley is still producing, still performing, still building, his legend secure regardless of what happens with the group he founded. Dave Hollister found peace in gospel and solo work, answering only to himself and his faith. Levi, Eric, and Mark are out there too, navigating their own versions of what comes after the spotlight fades, carrying memories of being part of something extraordinary and complicated in equal measure. Blackstreet gave us one of the smoothest anthems the 90s ever heard, a song about not doubting, about being sure, but behind it was a group full of doubt, built on contracts instead of trust, held together by a name that nobody could agree on who really owned. And maybe that's the realest thing about them. They sounded like a family, but they were a business. And in this business, even brotherhood has to be notarized.